Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapapunamu te moana, hui e tai ki e. Kia ora koutou, my name is Ali Adams and I will be your MC for this afternoon. So I am the Chief Executive at ChristchurchNZ. We're the city's economic development agency. And actually I was just having a conversation with Martin about what that means. What does an economic development agency do? We are essentially judged on whether or not we are increasing Christchurch's livability, its attractiveness, whether that's to visitors, businesses, investments, migrants, students, and also whether or not we're making Christchurch more productive. So they're the outcomes that we were looking for. We're always trying to make sure that we don't get in the way of the private sector or central government. We try and intervene. And we try again, I was saying earlier, try very hard to go in with an end in mind. So go in knowing how we're going to get out so that we can then move our intervention money elsewhere when it's already done the job it needs to do. Look, it's my absolute pleasure to be here today. I'm looking forward to hearing what both Martin and Roger have got to say. But before we begin, just a few housekeeping details from me. So the bathrooms can be found just outside the door here across the hallway. Please do remember to put your mobile phones on silent if you haven't already. She said, wondering whether she had in fact put hers on. If you hear a bellbird sound, that's me. So in the event of an earthquake, which I'm sure we won't have, it's just obviously really crucial to remain calm. Please don't go outside, just hold on, drop, hold, and cover, and just hold on until the shaking stops. And if there is a fire or an alarm goes off, please evacuate the building calmly. Fire exits are clearly marked, and the assembly area is just out here at the west boundary fence by Chester Street. So that's our health and safety. I'm not going to labour that anymore. But look, I just thought it would be quite nice, since you already know a little bit about me, it would be great for you each to get to know someone else here today. I'm sure you're probably sitting next to someone you do know, but hopefully there'll be someone on your table that you don't, or you may have to actually move around. So here. But whakawhanaungatanga refers to the process of establishing relationships. And if everyone can come away with one new connection today, then that's a pretty special start. So can you just take the next couple of minutes to introduce yourself to someone nearby that you don't know, and maybe share with each other just one thing that you're hoping to get out of the event today, please. Thanks. You're such a social media bod. You look lovely, I love that dress. Should stop talking into the mic, but you do look lovely. I did what we just did. Are we still going to use cider? Are we still going to use cider? So I'm kind of reluctant to break up this party, / unable to break up this party. So there will be There will be plenty of time at the end for you to continue these conversations. Can I ask you to come back into the room for a minute? Thank you. Looks like you've all got plenty to talk about, which is fantastic. That's exactly what this is about today. It is about networking and getting to know people. So, as I said, there will be some time at the end for a bit more networking and conversation. But let's get some good food for thought first before we get into that. So the agenda for the afternoon, I'm really briefly going to share with you an introduction to Christchurch City's economic ambition. Some of you will have heard of this, some of you won't. It's a real once over lightly. I would encourage you all to have a look at it online later. We've got a QR code that we can share so you can find it in detail, but I'll just give you a very brief overview into the history of this project and what it means for us. Then we're going to hear from Martin Rich. Martin is the co-founder and CEO of the Future Fit Foundation. Martin is a renowned sustainability and impact investment specialist with over 25 years of experience in both mainstream and social investment. And he co-founded the Future Fit Foundation to help create a society that is environmentally restorative, socially just, and economically inclusive. And that sounds like a very fine aspiration for all of us. I can't believe there are many people in this room who don't think that sounds like a nice society to be part of. And we're really lucky to have him joining us today. We're also going to be joined by Roger Robson-Williams. Roger is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Plant and Food Research. And Roger will share with us real-life examples of sustainability in action and how he has used the Future Fit benchmark within local businesses. Again, I think we're really lucky to have Roger here, and I'm sure we'll gain a lot from those insights. And then we're going to finish with an interactive Q&A session where you can ask our panel your burning questions. Now, we have actually got a Slido tool, but I'm thinking we might actually just do it through a mic. So we've got a couple of roving mics. We've got some questions that were already shared with us when you registered, but we'll just wander around the room and do a roving mic session, I think, just to keep it simple. So if you've got questions, do make a note of them. You will have a chance to ask them at the end. And just a final mention that we will be recording the presentation today so that those who missed out will be able to listen back, and that will be shared following the event on ChristchurchNZ channels. Right, so let me share a little bit, if I can make this work. Where am I pointing, Anton? At you? Da, da, da. Thank you. Let me share a little bit. Am I going the right way? Oh, Anton, help. Oh. Look at that. It's like a London bus. You wait for ages and then we get more one all at once. Could you maybe manage the presentation for me, Anton? I'll give you a nod when to move it on. Let's start with the first slide. Yeah, perfect. So I might actually grab a mic, if that's possible. Can I grab a mic and wander around? That'll work. Yeah, magic. So look, this is what I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk to you about the dark blue bit at the top, which is the Christchurch Economic Ambition. So we are owned by Christchurch City Council, and the council asked us to develop a framework of citywide strategies to enable us as an entire city to think about how we might move forward together economically. So we've only got $16 million a year. It's not a lot. And we can't change the future of the city on our own. The best way to get real momentum is by having really clear vision and ambition, and everybody, private sector, public sector, not-for-profit, pulling in the same direction. So they asked us specifically to develop 3 strategies. They asked us to develop a Christchurch city identity. And for those of you who are familiar with New Zealand Story, hands up if you've heard of New Zealand Story. Awesome. This is the city version of New Zealand Story. That is the easiest way to explain it. We're a small city in a small country, and the best way to maximise our bang for buck on a national or a global stage is by using consistent branding. So you'll see a few people today in the branded T-shirts. You'll see these little red pins around. We've got a simple look that we're trying to encourage people to use. There's a fabulous toolkit of great free assets that you can download. Go on there and grab them. And if you're talking about Christchurch as a place, whether you're recruiting or whatever it is you might be doing, feel free to use that stuff. It's free, it's there, and essentially it's all about being a city in balance. So we asked about 14,000 people why they moved to Christchurch or why they live in Christchurch, and it's really clear that this is a city where you can have it all. You can have the great job and the great lifestyle. You can ski in the morning and swim in the afternoon. You can be globally significant while still being small enough to know everybody when you walk down the street. So that was the message. It's about a city being in balance. I'm not going to talk about that at length. So if you've got questions, ask people at the end. The other one I just thought I'd touch on is the destination management plans. If you cast your mind back to pre-COVID, the city, in fact the country, was really creaking at the seams with tourism. So there was sort of concern over freedom campers, there was concern over not being able to book a great walk. There was an erosion of social licence, and so MB asked all the regional tourism organisations across the country to develop much more thoughtful and curated plans to manage tourist attraction. So think of it as the difference between cruise passengers arriving in Lyttelton, disgorging and all jumping on the number 8 bus because it costs $3.50 rather than the $35 the cruise ships were charging. And then the Lyttelton locals getting really cross because they couldn't commute into town, and then there being stickers on the windows saying cruise passengers not welcome. That is not destination management. Versus what we've had this year, which is a much more managed program that takes into account that social license and also the visitor experience. Now, the one thing I want to say there is that we were responsible for 2. We've done one for the Banks Peninsula, and we've done one for the broader Waitaha Canterbury region. The Waitaha Canterbury one is the only one out of 31 destination management plans across the country that is a growth plan. Because for the first time in 12 years, we can be a destination in our own right, not just a gateway. There are things to do in Christchurch and Canterbury, whereas before, because things were so broken, we were encouraging people to land here and move on. So that's really exciting. In fact, we're getting to the point where we're actually getting quite short on hotel capacity. So if you know anyone who wants to build a hotel in Christchurch, please point them in our direction. But look, I'm not going to talk about those in much detail. The one I want to talk about, because I need your help on it, is the economic ambition. Can you move me on, Anton? Yeah, perfect. So, the Christchurch Economic Ambition, we were asked what the economic future for the city should be. And when we've done these in the past, it's not the first time we've ever done this, we would do a lot of research and we'd write a strategy and we'd create lots of lovely actions and pillars and plans that we encouraged other people to act on. And guess what? They didn't, because they hadn't really been involved in the process of building it, and it was always done slightly separate from what they'd done, and it just really never got the momentum that we hoped or wanted these strategies to get. So what we did this year is something really different, and to my knowledge there isn't anyone else in the world doing it this way, and it may not work, but my impression over the first 4 months of starting to implement this is that we're onto something quite exciting if we can really keep the momentum going. So what we did is we got together with a small group of people, and we used a beautiful Māori tool-making kit called Te Kore Kore Ka, which puts you in some really uncomfortable mindsets. And it made us think very long-term, very multi-generationally about what the future for this city is. And it became really clear that the North Star, or the goal for long-term economic prosperity in this city, is about moving towards a more regenerative economy. Now, what do I mean by regenerative economy? If at one end you've got an extractive economy that takes stuff out and doesn't care, and you move up the continuum a bit to sustainable, which I would define, probably wrongly, and I'm sure there are plenty of people in this room that will correct me, as do minimum harm, through to circularity, where you kind of make sure that your waste is someone else's treasure, great. At this end is regenerative, where you're actually doing good stuff. You're actually repairing the damage that has been done by previous generations. And the word economy is really important here. Can you flick to the next slide for me, please, Anton? Because if you just use the word regenerative on its own, it's quite a triggering word for some people, especially if you're potentially a farmer on the Canterbury Plains. It can be quite triggering. You may think that someone's going to tell you that you have to plant hemp on your land, or it may make people think about the regeneration of Christchurch following the earthquakes. But actually, together with the word economy, what that's actually saying is that there's money to be made here, and actually it is much more dangerous to lag than it is to lead. And there are some of the reasons why it's more dangerous to lag on here. If you want to export, we've already got the tyranny of distance, so you better be dealing with that now. If you want to export to Europe, you've got to start thinking about this, because those gates are going to be closed if we don't do it. But also there are really good, solving the challenges we have as a world, you're looking at, there are two ways of doing it. You can make behavioural change, which is great, and we should be doing it, and there's lots of great behavioural change that you can do. Or you can innovate your way out of it. We've got a company here. Does anyone know about Aspiring Materials?
Epic company. They are basically using rocks, and again, forgive me, Diana, if I'm getting this a little bit wrong and oversimplifying it, but they're basically sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere through the rocks that are already existing in the world. Now that sounds like there's money in it to me. So Leafed Foods, another great organisation doing fabulous plant protein. We have got some incredible leading edge companies here doing great things in this space. So how can we help to catalyse that? You flick onto the next slide. Now, obviously, when you start talking about multi-generational ambition, it gets a bit esoterical and a bit hard to actually grasp. So we've brought it back to something a little bit more tangible. We've said, okay, well, what does that look like in the next 10 years? Because getting to a regenerative economy is going to take some time. And we've got 4 really clear objectives. They are essentially, the way I think of them, they are essentially about business, which is about sharing value through business, tuapapa, which is about place, so ako, which is about learning or people, making sure that we've got the skilled workforce available to help fill these great opportunities we've got, and advancing or kukuri, which is this concept of working together well. So, and I think that's where the gold is. If we can again flick to the next slide. They then split down into 10, I'm going to rattle through this really quickly, but there are 10 priorities. So that start to say, well, again, what does that actually mean in practice? I'll give you an example. ChristchurchNZ, we can't address all 10 of these. We just can't. We're not big enough or able enough or the right agency to be doing it. So we've just selected 6 of these that we are going to work towards in our next 4 to 6 year plan. And I would encourage you all to have a look online and see which ones of these are relevant for you and which ones you could play an active role in. Now, this is where it gets, I think, where it gets interesting. So in December of last year, Council signed this off. They endorsed it, and you'll see a quote in a couple of slides from our Mayor, Phil Major. It's really important that Council signed it off because we're talking about systemic change here. And in order to get real systemic change, you've got to make sure you've got the regulation system right to be able to enable and encourage it. And when they signed it off, we basically said, okay, we can now really start getting into this. What does it mean? How do we get the momentum going? And there are 4 sort of areas that we're looking at. They're not actually sequential. We are actually doing a bit in all of them. But I think that, there is an element of sequentiality, if that is a word to them. So let's start with number 1. Number 1 is the launch. This is about getting people on board. So over the past 4 months, I have been going around private sector, public sector, not-for-profit, talking about this and asking people whether or not they're in. Are you in? Are you interested in this movement? Does it actually make sense to you? Do you think it's the right thing to do? Is it something you can put your name to as an organisation and say, yeah, we'll try. We'll see what we can do in this space. The second bit is we've then been saying, okay, let's make it really visible. So, and I'll show you a dashboard in a little while. One of the ways we can make it more visible is actually, how can we measure this? How can we measure it in a way that's really visible so that people can see whether we're tracking in the right direction? But also, how can we tell some of these great stories about aspiring materials and Leafed and all the other great things that are happening? So we have more B Corps in Christchurch than anywhere else in the country, but nobody knows that because we don't tell anybody that. So how can we tell these great stories? So, and also, how can we get people that have signed up in stage 1 to start thinking about what those 10 priorities mean for them? Number 3 is about capability building. We're in the early stages of this, but if you take one simple regenerative challenge about, let's say, decarbonisation, we just did a stock take, and there are, I think, 128 different tools or sources available in the country at the moment to help you decarbonise. Some of them are funds, some of them are online tools, some of them are agencies. There's lots of different things. Navigating that is really hard if you're an SME. So how can we make that navigation easier? And then how can we work out where the gaps are? And then work with our movement of people from Group 1 to fill the gaps. So we're actually all utilising this to move together. And then the last bit about collaboration, which for me is the real magic in this. And maybe you could flick onto the slide, Anton, that shows the companies that have signed off. So we'll flick through Phil. We'll have a look. There's a nice quote from Phil. It's online if you want to have a look. These are some of the people that have signed up so far. And you'll see there's a real mixture. But the reason I want to put this up is some magic happened. In October last year, Rod Carr and Peter Scott, so Rod Carr, the Climate Change Commissioner, ex-Vice-Chancellor, and Chancellor, ex-University of Canterbury, and Peter Scott, who's the chair of ECAN, hosted a climate hui. at the University of Canterbury, and they invited a really great group of people. There was about 40 people. We had a wonderful round table. There was a lot of great discussion about the need for things such as, for example, an energy strategy for Canterbury and Christchurch. We need an energy strategy. We've got these big transition challenges facing us. How can we start to strategically think about how we move towards those? And there was this kind of really clear need for action, and then everyone pretty much sat there with their thumb on their heads, saying, oh, I can't do that, it's not me. So we all came out of that climate hui, and we all kind of went, that was that then, great, awesome. Very, very nice, clear interest in doing something, but no one able to do it. Now what happened is when I met Dita Consulting and Orion, they said, I found that climate change hui really annoying. What can we do? We said, I tell you what if we all just kind of got together and created a bit of a beta project, a bit of a straw man where we said, okay, what do we know? What could this look like? What could an energy strategy for Christchurch, and then we could think about broader Canterbury look like? And then what steps would need to be taken in order to take it to the next level? Maybe it might cost us 150K. We could then go back to these guys and say, hey, look, anyone keen to put in 10 grand? If we can get 15 people to put in 10 grand, we've got an energy strategy. Now, to me, this is where the magic happens. Because those guys, Dita Consulting, they're all putting their time in free because they care about this mission. They care about this ambition. And there's another kind of burgeoning kind of, I would call it like a mission-based hit squad coming around restoring the biodiversity of Whakaropo Littleton Harbour. There might be another one around procurement. So with these little kind of bubbling kind of mission-based opportunities for groups of these people to get together and just actually say, let's get it done. It's not about the doing, it's about creating a path forward so that people can see how it might happen. Go to the next one. This is just a quick example of what the dashboard might look like. We're still in the early days. This is much harder than you might think. So we've had an awful lot of data from council and our council-owned organisations. What's the best data? What's realistic? How do we measure everything in the city, private and public sector? So that's work ongoing, but we're hoping to have something up and running before the end of May. Oh, it's live this morning. There you go, look at that. That's under promise and over deliver in action. Good work, Alistair. Yeah. We'll flick to the next one, Anton. So look, what we need from you, if you're interested, please have a look at it online, go and digest it. We don't want people to sign up in name only. We want some of the best conversations I've had have been with organisations that have really struggled with this. You know, I really like this, but I'm not sure that every decision we take is regenerative. Great. That's exactly why we're doing this. So we just want to start the conversation. So have a look at it. If you're interested in getting involved, please do. That's Alistair at the back there, who's our comms manager. So flick him a copy of your logo and a quote. If you want to talk more and you want to actually have a conversation, just let Alistair or me know and we'll come on in and talk to you. There's a link there on the screen to it. I'm really interested to see what people think. This is the beginning of us sort of starting to talk a bit more broadly about it, and it's really early days, but I honestly think it's something that could potentially be quite transformational if we all get behind it. Right, it's enough about me. I'm now, if I could put my eyes on so that I can actually see, I'm now going to hand over to the wonderful Martin Rich. So Martin and Roger, are you presenting together or Martin first? Martin first. So Martin Rich, coming up to the stage. Enjoy.
Wow. Thank you, Ali. Thank you to you and the team, firstly, for having us. None of you are going to believe if I say that we haven't actually compared and contrasted stories or slides. That intro couldn't have been more appropriate. You're going to love it. It's so nice to be back here. This is actually my third time in Christchurch. I'm based in London in the UK. That said, I think I probably need to start with an apology, which is the first time I was here was February 2011. I actually have photos from inside the cathedral approximately 48 hours before the earthquake struck. And literally we got off, my family and I got off the plane at Heathrow, and the first thing we saw on the news story was the terrible thing that had happened. And, you know, just couldn't believe. It's like, but we've just come from there. The second time, the last time I was here was March 2020. So again, I had to go home in something of a hurry. I was thankfully, I'm pleased to say I did manage to get back home, but then, like everybody else, sort of sat in my house for 18 months. So I'm hoping that this time I'm not bringing with me like a third natural disaster. If there is, then I guess I probably won't come back. But no, joking aside, it's fantastic to be here. Been on the road with Roger now for about 3 weeks. First week in Australia, then 2 weeks, mainly a week up in the North Island, week down here in the South Island, with the existing and nascent Future Fit community that we've got. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do as an organisation. I'm going to give you some sort of challenging ideas and things to think about. Future Fit Foundation is a UK-based charity, so we're clearly a non-profit. So I'm not trying to sell you anything. Everything that I'm going to show you is open source. We give it away for free. You can go onto the internet now if you find me boring, and you can start reading it. Trust me, that's harder going than listening to me. So I'm selling you, if anything, an idea and a concept. Again, but it's just going to align so beautifully with the introduction that Ali gave us. Do I need to point that in that direction? Does that work? There we go. So this is our vision as an organisation. A future fit society is one that will protect the possibility that humans and other life can flourish forever by being environmentally restorative, socially just, and economically inclusive. And again, the fact that nobody left earlier tells me that everybody here is more or less on board for this as a vision. But this is a global vision. How can we create this as a global society? Quick, obligatory slide on who's using. So these are some of the organizations around the world who are already using our framework and our approach. And you'll see within that a number of organizations locally, THL, Tourism Holdings Limited, hopefully you're familiar with that. Probably like the marquee listed corporation in New Zealand that's using us, and Plant and Food Research. Roger's going to tell you a little bit about their journey later on. So, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? Well, we basically decided that we'd start small and try and tackle global climate change, social inequality, and social injustice. Seemed like three good things to sort of, tackle. And when I met my co-founder about 12 years ago now, when we first started laying out what we were going to do, we didn't really realize that we were going to try and re-engineer the entire global socio-economic system. Otherwise, two blokes in a coffee shop in London probably wouldn't have thought that was a great idea. Thankfully, we didn't realize that was what we were trying to do, so we just went ahead, quit our jobs, and started anyway. And 12 years later, here we are. We all know, I'm not going to patronize any of you by telling you that the world's falling apart in all sorts of different ways. But what these graphs point to is this concept of unending exponential growth in the usage of everything and the impact of everything as society has continued to increase around the globe. In London, back end of last year, I went to listen to a chat from a fantastic sustainability expert. He's in his mid-70s now. And he pointed out that when he was born, there were 2.5 billion people in the world. And over his lifetime, there's now north of 7.5, 8 billion. So the global population has tripled in the lifetime of this one guy. And you just start thinking, wow, look at that change. And that's what these graphs really are pointing to, right? So the number of people on the planet, and with that, the amount of gases being pushed out, the amount of resources that we're using, et cetera, et cetera. You can read all the slides up there. That is not possible to continue on a finite planet. We are on a rock spinning around the sun. We have what we have. The only thing that gets refreshed every day is sunlight, at least if you live in this part of the world. If you live where I live, we don't get an awful lot of that, so it's been quite nice to see some of it. But every time we use up and throw away something, right, it doesn't magically reappear. So we have the resources that we have, and when they're used up, they're gone. Yes, some things are renewable if we manage them in the right way. But we are blasting through all of these different limits, and it's just not possible to keep growing in this way. The system is going to explode at some point, and unfortunately we all therefore are seeing the outcomes of this and we're heading probably very rapidly towards some very, very nasty outcomes, which we would all rather avoid. So how can business respond to these issues? Well, the first point is we need to change the underlying outcomes that we are seeking to drive from the fundamental model that we have, which is shareholder value, which has held forth since the 1950s or so, where the intention of business was to maximize and internalize all the profits and externalize as much as possible the costs and the harm, sort of Milton Friedman in extremis. And of course, the outcome of this was always going to be the concentration of more and more wealth in fewer and fewer hands at the cost of more and more damage to those externalities. There is no other outcome that was ever likely to happen. But for some reason, we didn't see it, or if we did see it, we chose to ignore that that was what was going to happen. So what we see today was an inevitable outcome of the system. I used to say, as an ex-investment banker, that the global socio-economic system is broken. It's not broken. It's working brilliantly. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Unfortunately, what it was designed to do has quite a lot of fairly bad outcome. So something needs to change. In the 1990s and the 2000s, this concept of shared value came along, which began to kind of effectively draw these circles together and say, look, business genuinely does bring value to planet and society. So if we can find a way to value that positive impact, perhaps that offsets the negative impact in some way. And clearly this is a slightly better model, but it's very unsatisfactory. How do we offset? How do we align those things? How do we value what's enough? If we go outside and chop down 100 trees somewhere in Christchurch, and we go and plant 100 trees in my backyard in Hertfordshire, is that okay? On average, we're the same? That's fine, right? Or if we double the chief executive's pay and we halve the pay of everybody else, well, on balance, that's the same amount of money we're spending. That's okay, isn't it? Ali's nodding. Of course it's not okay. We can't just offset in that way. Carbon is about the only thing that more or less a kilo of carbon here versus a kilo of carbon over there. It's about the only thing where we can say we can offset in that manner. What we actually have to move to is this concept of what we call system value. We have to keep bringing those circles together and say business can only flourish, or indeed any organization can only flourish, if it is operating within a flourishing society, within a flourishing planet. That's a remarkable coincidence to the tagline that you've got. We really hadn't pre-talked about that. But that is the only place that we can get to if we want to have a genuinely flourishing society, if we're interested in actually achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So how do we get to that point? It's a lovely idea, but is it practical? Can we get there? Well, the good news is systems science actually tells us what these boundary conditions look like. There's a framework that was developed in Sweden in the late 1980s and has been developed ever since, called the natural step. It's actually quite well known by sustainability professionals, particularly in this part of the world, actually. And that framework has been used by a number of people that you will have heard of. Johan Rockström's Planetary Boundaries. Ring any bells for a few people? Yes, a few nods. So he used that same underlying science. Anybody read Kate Raworth's Donut Economics? Yeah, a few nods there. Kate used exactly the same underlying system science, and we've used that same science. For those of you who've read Kate's book, think of it this way. Donut Economics explains why we need a new socio-economic system. Future Fit shows you how we actually get there. So if we're going to move in this direction, we said, we've got to take that framework, but now we have to make it practical. The work behind the natural step, the framework for strategic sustainable development, to give it its very technical title, is a wonderful bit of reading, but it's deeply academic, it's deeply esoteric, it's quite a trawl to get through. It's brilliant, but the average chief executive is not going to read it. And if she does, she's going to say, well, I get it, but how on earth do I apply this to my organization? What do I do with it? What we basically did was take that leap of thinking out of the equation for everybody because we did it. And when I say we, I mean a global collaboration of experts that we drew together. So systems thinkers, academics, system-specific, issue-specific experts, consultants, companies, investors. And we said, what does it look like if we translate this wonderful set of principles into some properties, firstly? So if we go to the next slide, these are our 8 properties of a future fit society. Now, we're not going to, you can read them all. Can you look at those and say, my organization does this? Can you look at those and say, my city does this? I do this as an individual, or my household does this? Can we say that these are things that we are already achieving? And of course, we are I said there was 8. Those of you who are good with maths will have gone, hang on, there's only 7 there. So we put the 8th one up that needs to underpin all of this, is that our social norms, our governance systems, and what we define as economic growth drive the pursuit of those other 7. Back to what I was saying earlier about what is the outcome of the system. As Danella Meadows said, a system does what a system is designed to do. So we need to change the system so that it is designed to achieve those other sets of outcomes. If we don't have a system that's designed to eliminate pollution and waste, or make energy renewable and available to all, then it's not going to produce those outcomes. So how do we make sure that we start from a perspective of saying, these are the things that we want to achieve, this is the sort of regenerative behavior that we want to have? Then we need to change those underlying drivers in order to also then give us those outcomes. Now, if there's any management consultants in the room, put your hand up briefly. 1 or 2, excellent. Well, you'll all be delighted to know then that it all comes down to a 2x2 grid, as all good things in life do. So we're going to think about our direct and our indirect, our negative and our positive impacts. And if we're coming from the perspective that I've just outlined, then it seems like a fairly easy thing to say, well, surely then the starting point is how do we eliminate all of those negative impacts? If we're going to achieve those 8 properties, we need to work out what harm we're causing and how do we get rid of it. And again, the good news is we've been through the work and we've come up, there we go, with the beating heart of the Future Fit Business Benchmark, which is these what we call break-even goals. 23 of them it ended up being against the 8 drivers. And at this level, very simple statements of what you must be able to do. You don't need a PhD in anything to understand at least the concept of what is behind each of those. Now, in our online guidance, we provide 30 to 40 pages worth of guidance behind each and every one of these to explain what it actually means. So what do we mean by energy? What do we mean by renewable sources? What do you need to be thinking about? What is within your scope of responsibility? What is not within your scope of responsibility? And importantly, how do you start to measure on a 0 to 100% scale? Where are you against all of these goals? 100% is where you need to get to, and you'll be somewhere on that scale today. You might have the data to know where you are. You might not have the data at all. You might not know where you are. But that's okay. If you can start to recognize it's something you need to understand, then you can start to find the data and start to work it out. We've mapped all of these against the SDGs, so at the 169 target level. So if you're serious about those, what is it that you need to be doing firstly to not be avoiding harm? Sorry, not causing harm to the SDGs. At this point, we're simply talking about how you're not damaging those planetary and societal boundary conditions. So this is about how we don't get in the way of the SDGs. If you're not paying at least a living wage to everybody who works with you, then I would argue you're actually getting in the way of the goal no poverty, for example. So all of these are shown on within our guidance. And you can start to work out where you are on that journey and start to think, what would it look like for my business or my organization if I was able to say yes to every single one of these? Now, of course, it's incredibly hard to do on our own because we're all operating in a system that itself is not a future fit system. So particularly the goal on procurement, it's really hard because, well, if I'm trying to buy things from organizations that aren't themselves future fit, it's very hard for me to be future fit. So that's why this has to be a journey, and it has to be a journey that we get everybody on. And that as part of this, you start to be influencing down through your supply chains so that we can see that progress being made. And we can talk about some examples of that later on if that's of interest. The other thing to say briefly on these goals as well is this one is done very much from a business perspective. However, we have local authorities, we've got cities, and others starting to look at how they use this. Our goal one day is to have actually produced a full suite of benchmarks, from individuals and households, through cities and towns, through business to local authority, government, and up to country level. So that ultimately we'd have this set of benchmarks that all neatly interact with each other. Some of the goals will be identical for all of them. Some of them will change a little bit because obviously the political with a small p relationship between staff and senior management is different to, say, mayor or city council leader and citizens. But the concepts obviously would all stay the same. That's the do no harm side. Let's look at the positive side quickly. The good thing here is there's three things that we can do. Firstly, we can try and reduce the negative impact of others. We can go beyond break even ourselves into positive territory, and we can help to amplify the positive impact of others. I like to think about it this way. If I'm there trying to reduce and eliminate my negative impacts, and I'm trying to increase my positive impacts, and if Roger is stood next to me trying to do the same at his organization, it's kind of like us holding hands and then saying, what can we do to help each other reduce our negatives and increase our positives? And again, what if every business that you were interacting with, what if every organization you were interacting with was doing that self-same thing? You kind of get the idea how we can start to move in the right direction. And as we go up and down the supply chains, we can think of this sort of pyramid slowly rolling out of people all moving in that same direction. I often get accused, therefore, of being an ex-investment banker selling a pyramid scheme. Read into that what you will. And there, behind those positive goals, there's positive pursuits. There's a similar set, 24 positive pursuits. These are categories rather than actions. We can't outline every single positive thing that you could do. So rather, we've looked at it through the lens of categories that help you to think, what is my purpose as an organization? Where am I bringing that regenerative, rebuilding value to planet and society that enables me to say, this is where I'm bringing the value and where I need to do more of that whilst I'm eliminating my negative impacts, and then ultimately being financially successful because of that, not in spite of the harm that I'm causing. So this is about trying to create a sort of a common language to talk about where are you intervening in the system and where are you bringing that benefit and that regeneration. And then cohesively, that gives you the story to be telling to your stakeholders, to your investors, to your customers, to your staff. This is what we're about as an organization. This is the journey we're on. This is what we're trying to achieve in the next 3, 5, 10 years. Here is how we're going to get to this point of only delivering our positive purpose and eliminating all of the negative impacts that inadvertently perhaps we've been causing along the way. Let's think about it one final way as I begin to bring us into land. If we're going to lift ourselves from where society is today to the future, then we need to figure out how we're going to yank on this end of the lever as hard as we possibly can. And this diagram actually doesn't work overly well because it implies that there's a solid floor below where society is today. And of course, it's not true. It's actually a big squishy mess. And if we keep pressing on the wrong side, we're just going to sink lower and lower into the mire until the whole thing falls apart. And the challenge with so much of today's best practice is it's not good enough practice. It's slightly less bad practice. It's slightly reducing our harm practice. And the problem with that is it's still pushing on the wrong side of the fulcrum point. We're still going to be taking ourselves in the wrong direction, maybe slightly more slowly, but it's still on the wrong side. And so that list of break-even goals I gave you, the slightly challenging news with that is even if we get there, and that is incredibly hard for lots of businesses to achieve, we're only at that fulcrum point. At that point, we're only not making things worse. We're not actually being regenerative and rebuilding at that point. But the good news is that if we are pursuing these ideas of positive pursuits, then actually we are now pulling on the right side of the lever. And we are starting to cancel out and reverse those previous negative impacts. And if we want to have maximum systemic influence, we need to think, how do we address the key drivers and the root causes of those negative impacts? Now, depending where you work or organizations you're involved in, there'll be different points along that spectrum that you're able to intervene with. Roger will talk to us in a bit about the work of Plant and Food, which actually, by its very nature, is able to operate a little bit more at the end of that rather than toward the middle. But this is what we need to be doing. So again, I just encourage you to think, how can the organizations that I work with, that I'm influencing, where upon that graph can we be? So I'll bring us into land with this sort of summary. So if you're going to think about take away, what is Future Fit? Think of us as a strategic management tool. We are not a reporting framework. We're not a badge. Yes, we have badges. Yes, we can influence how you report. Hopefully the strategy that this would enable you to build will enable you to do very good and very real reporting. But at its heart, what we're trying to do is give you a tool to figure out what that change process needs to look like. Think about it this way. Step one is, what is your purpose? Step two is, how do you bring that purpose about? That's Future Fit. Step three is the change management process that you've got to manage internally. How do you bring everybody and all your stakeholders with you on that journey of continual improvement? We've mapped, as I've shown, all the goals and everything to the Sustainable Development Goals, if that's something that you're pursuing. We've also connected it into some of the new reporting standards that are coming along predominantly at the moment. The Natalie titled Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD from Europe. But if any of you are, as was Ali said earlier, if you're supplying into Europe, that, along with the CSDDD Procurement Directive, is something you're going to have to be able to talk into. And again, having this cohesive strategy is essential for all of that. Our website is there. Please take a look. I realized I haven't put out my little Changemaker QR. That was a miss. I'll do that while Roger's talking. If you'd like to be involved and see what's happening within the community, we have an online Changemaker community. It's totally free. We've got close on 2,000 people in there now. We put in there company reports from people who've used the framework. We do whole webinars in there. We put all of our tools in there. So pile in, come and take a look. All the methodology is online, so you'll find everything through that address. And I'll put a little QR code out the front, which will take you straight to the Changemaker community if you're interested. So I'm going to pause for breath. On that point, I'm going to hand over to Roger, and he's going to tell you a little bit about the journey of Plant and Food Research. Thank you very much.
In a venue like this, I rather feel I should stand here looking solemn and start with, dearly beloved. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Roger Robson-Williams, Chief Sustainability Officer at Plant and Food Research, and my job to kind of navigate us to the point where we can start to hear from you is to be brief and engaging, and I can only guarantee one of those, so I will try and be brief. But before I get started, thanks again to the Christchurch NZ team for helping us put this together. It's been great working with Diana and Kat and Anton in particular, so thanks folks. And the other thing I want to say by way of a kind of introduction, for me this conversation is all about prosperity. It's just prosperity perhaps over several normal business cycles rather than prosperity in the next 2, 3 or 5 years. It's a slightly longer time frame. And in relation to that, just got a whakatauki I wanted to share with you, which I think is really apposite to this conversation. He tino ki ronga, he tamore ki raro. to flourish above, we need to be firmly rooted below. And I think if there's one take home from this korero this afternoon from my perspective, it's in your business, whether you're starting up a new business or you're an established business, if the basis of that is firmly rooted in sustainable, regenerative practices and a mindset, you will prosper in the long term. So, Plant Food Research, we're a Crown Research Institute. Our mission is to create the world's most sustainable food systems. And I say it and it sounds terribly grandiose, but the point of sharing that with you is that we're a kind of purpose-driven organisation. We seek to create a surplus that we can reinvest in science, but essentially we're purpose-based. And so, in terms of the now disappeared seesaw, we've always felt that we're kind of operating at that kind of system change, positive pursuit end, and hadn't really until about 5 years ago started to consider the inadvertent harm we might be causing through our operations, and felt that if we wanted to show a kind of authentic leadership in our mission, we really needed to be paying attention to that as well. So we latched on to the Future Fit business benchmark for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's free. Which was really helpful for me to sell it into the organisation. Secondly, and much more important than that, it's robustly grounded, as you've heard from Martin, in systems science, and it's quantitative, which really appeals to, as you might imagine, a science-based organisation. And it's a system that you can pick up and learn from and apply to your business, and through that, in our case, really learn some quite interesting things about sustainability and about ourselves, which I think is a much richer experience than helicoptering somebody in to kind of assess you against some kind of framework or other and then tell you how well you're doing or otherwise. So it was a kind of journey and a process for us we thought was important. And it's open and transparent, and we communicate with the Future Fit Foundation about things we think could be better about it, and that's well received. This is a kind of a co-creation process we're in where there are improvements that could be made. So I just wanted to share 3 dimensions of our experience with it. First of all, I wanted to talk about some of the outputs that have arisen from us using this. So those are the tangible things that you can point to and say, that's something that didn't exist before we started on this journey. And then I want to talk briefly about some of the outcomes. So outputs, all very well, but what were the outcomes from those? And I wanted to talk in particular about the learnings from it and about the practice change. And then finally, of course, the really knotty one, what impact has it had? So to what extent and in what ways has it added value to the things that we think are important? So very briefly, in terms of outputs, as you might expect, we have a dashboard now, so we're tracking our progress against each of those 23 break-even goals. We can see where we are now, we can see where we need to get to, we can prioritise action, we can be transparent about that. Great. And of course, we can wrap around that some communication. So internally, that's important because a lot of our people have a very strong kind of personal value around working for an organisation that's doing good and not inadvertently doing harm. So the internal communication that we can wrap around our dashboard and our journey on this future fitness journey is important, and engaging our people. And secondly, of course, we can use it externally, and an important part of that is that story about us being authentic leaders in this space. So as well as providing the science to help other organisations be more sustainable, we're paying attention to our own sustainability. And we have developed specific targets. I mentioned that. That's what one of the advantages of having a dashboard, seeing where you are and where you need to get to. You can set yourself targets. So those are some of the kind of specific, tangible outputs from the process. In terms of outcomes, starting off with learnings. So one of the big learnings right from the outset was that sustainability is a lot more than having worm farms to compost the waste from our staff canteens or reducing our use of single-use plastic in our laboratories. There are some really important social dimensions to sustainability, both in terms of the well-being of our people and the extent to which we are a good neighbour in the communities we're operating in. And we have 14 sites around the Motu, and some of those sites, including our site at Lincoln, are in kind of suburban or even urban environments. And so how are we interacting with the communities that we're working in? So those were some of the that breadth of definition of what sustainability might mean for us. As I've already alluded to, knowing where we are on that spectrum and what Martin's framework, what the Future Fit Business Benchmark provides you is an absolute line in the sand for each of these 23 dimensions of organisational life, below which you can't really claim to be sustainable. So that has been extremely useful for us. And then in terms of practice change, just a few examples. So we now have key performance indicators assigned to our senior leadership team that address specific shortcomings in our performance against the benchmark. So that's a really significant practice change for us because we have people that are taking responsibility for change. We are pursuing increasing the proportion of the energy that we use that's renewably generated, and we've made good progress on that over the last 5 years. And we now have a CapEx budget, a small CapEx budget to tackle things that are capital related to improve our performance. So those are some really tangible kind of practice changes in the organisation. And I guess the most important one is that when we are planning what we're going to do over the next few years, we're thinking about the implications of that for our sustainability as indicated by the benchmark. So some really kind of tangible differences in the way we're organising ourselves as a business. So then we come to the kind of really knotty issue. Has any of that created any positive impact for us as an organisation and for the society that we're operating in? And I think we can say without question our environmental footprint is smaller and becoming smaller, and we're paying greater attention to that. So that's great. I think we can say that we are a more inclusive and fairer place to work than we were 5 years ago. But I think probably the most important one for me is that we can now, I think quite authentically say we're really trying to show some leadership in this space. So not just through the science that we do, which is super important and where we're going to have the greatest impact, but through the way we do that science, the way we look after our people, the wider role that we're trying to play in society and the communities that we work in. So that for me is the bigger impact, and hopefully that will grow over time. And that really was all I wanted to say. May not have been engaging, but it was brief.
Thank you, Roger. I think it was, it's got an electric shock. I'm sure that's not a good sign. But it was both engaging and brief. Look, what we're going to do now is we're going to ask Roger and Martin to answer some very curly questions. I'm sure you've got plenty. I hope you have. I've got a few that were put in when people subscribed, so we have got a few to kick things off. But does anyone have a burning question that they want to ask first? We've got mics in the audience.
Hello, I'm Nigel Sharpland from, in fact, we're a design company based in Christchurch, technology development, and one of our big focuses is in sustainable futures, which leads me to my question of plant and food. You did mention about the biggest impact that you can have is the science that you do and the organisations that you work for and with. Could you give us some insights as to how you're making decisions about who you work with and what are the sort of measures that you use to decide whether they're aligned with your value system?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. So who we work with is defined really by our statement of core purpose and the mission that we've been given by the government, by the New Zealand people. And so it's the horticulture, seafood and arable sectors and the businesses operating in those sectors. So those are the people we're working with primarily. In terms of what we do, we have our own strategy, which is around, as I've said, trying to help create the world's most sustainable food system, but we also respond to the needs of our customers. And it'd be worth mentioning that in terms of our revenue, a third of our revenue comes from the public purse. A third of it comes from fee-for-service commercial work, which is the work that we do for customers that turn up and say, can you help us with this problem? And a third of it comes from the royalties from plant varieties that we breed. And increasingly we're looking at, for example, with the plant variety breeding, the plant breeding work, developing varieties that are adapted to the future that we're heading into in terms of climate change. I could talk to you afterwards more in detail about the work we're doing, but as a broad sweep, I hope that kind of goes some way to answer your question. And if not, I'll have another go.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions? Yep.
Hi, Martin. My name's Lana Kennett. I was just curious, like you had some really interesting companies in New Zealand who are Future Fit accredited and many globally as well. I wondered if you could share some stories of how them adopting Future Fit has made what they do more meaningful to their customers, and how that is, like the meaning of Future Fit and what it's doing is passed on potentially to their customers, or maybe not.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great question. So a couple of examples. I mean, let's start with THL here in New Zealand. What I love about what the team has done there is they now talk about working with a future fit mindset. I remember their chief executive's a gentleman called Grant Webster. Might be a familiar name to some of you. He makes me look short. When the previous time I saw him, he apologized and said, look, Martin, he said, we're not going to be talking about using Future Fit anymore. I was like, oh, where's this going? He said, yeah, I want to talk about having a Future Fit mindset because we've just embedded all of this into everything that we do. And I just gave him a huge hug. It was like, brilliant, that's what I want to hear. What's that meaning for them is all the way down through the organization, people are understanding and embedding what this means. So directly to your question, we're actually doing a little bit of work with them at the moment. They're designing a training program for their crews, so the folks who are literally there, handing you the keys to the RV and encouraging you to, think about how you're using it in a responsible manner, particularly around places like Queenstown. And that is all built off a Future Fit mindset. Now, they're not going to sit there with a graph of 23 goals and all of that, but that essence is being distilled down into, you are a crew member, this still matters to you, how you treat the customer, how you treat each other, how you encourage our customers to be using the resources that we're giving to them for a week or two. This all matters. So that's one simple example. I'll give you another very different example from a company in Germany called Wiesmann, who make heat pumps and HVAC systems. Big company, 4 billion euro turnover, 14,000 people, so major organization, and they make things, big boxes with pumps and electronics and stuff in it. They, as part of creating an amazing strategy, and I really, if anybody's into the geeks out on this stuff, go and find the Wiesmann, their latest sustainability strategy report. It is the best sustainability report and strategy report I have read, and I have read a lot of them. One of the little anecdotes in there was they took one of their new heat pumps off the end of the production line, and they stuck it in a room with a handful of their engineers and a lot of spanners and screwdrivers and said, take it apart. Figure out how much could be recycled at the end of its lifetime. How much of it could be repurposed? How much of it could be repaired? And of course, these guys are stood there going, oh, we've never done this before. And suddenly, with scratched and bleeding knuckles as they're trying to sort of get that unit piece out, and it's like, oh, I can't quite reach that, and oh, this bit's glued to that, so we can't take those apart, so we couldn't actually separate and reuse these pieces. And suddenly, this is back to the gentleman at the first question. So, design. It's all about that design piece. Have you thought about that from the outset, so that now, as they're starting to think about moving their model from selling stuff to effectively rental of the service, so that they could take the units back at end of life? Guess what? That encourages you to make them in a modular, repairable manner. To think about when the things have reached the end of life, what are you going to do with them? How much of that can be renewed or recycled? And I absolutely love that. So just little things like that, getting that embedded into the mindset of how some of these organizations are working and how it impacts every single area of the business. If you're going to be doing this seriously, it's about embedding that future fit mindset. And that means every single person in the organization, not just the sustainability team, not just the chief exec, absolutely every single person.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, here in the front. Oh, we'll come back to you.
Kia ora. Thank you. Yeah, just really interested. We have small to medium enterprises, many of them. You've given some really great examples of perhaps large organisations. I wonder how applicable this is, the scalability for small organisations.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the organisations that I've had the pleasure of applying the benchmark to is the New Zealand Tech Association, which is I can't remember how many, maybe 15 people, and almost no physical footprint. It's an umbrella organisation for the New Zealand tech sector. And the chief exec there was very keen to show some leadership for among the organisations that his association represents. Picked up the benchmark. We've gone through the process for a couple of years now, and he's been very serious every year, publishing in their annual report their progress and making progress during the year so that the next time around they can see that they've made some improvements on a whole bunch of fronts, which is great. And so that's a small, very small environmental footprint, like kind of physical footprint organisation that have found it extremely useful, particularly around tightening up some of their policies related to well-being and equity and diversity, and not that they were, bad. They just didn't really have the processes documented in a way that would help them to manage risk. And just on that, I would say that for us as an organisation, one dimension of the benchmark is actually just around risk management. I won't go into a great deal of detail, but attending sustainability reduces your exposure to all sorts of different risks, and we found the benchmark kind of useful, and so has the NZ Tech Association.
And one of the banks in the UK, Virgin Money, who we've worked with, if you're not familiar with them, I think Kiwi Bank, I think seems to be like an equivalent here. We worked with them to develop a simplified version of the benchmark through an online tool called the Sustainable Business Coach, which has Future Fit buried in the background of it, but it's all question driven, it's not data, absolutely intended for small borrowers, in that case of Virgin Money, and just enables you to go through, but it prioritizes some of the goals, and it pops those up, and it then gives you, it sort of like gamifies it into a couple of steps that you could take to start monitoring things and changing things. So for example, renewable energy, it says, do you even know how much renewable energy you get? If you do, is it 0 to 25, 25 to 75, or 75% and above? So it gives you like little targets to start chasing. It creates a little score for you. So that's a nice, simple thing that absolutely any business of any size. So the benchmark as a whole is designed to work for any business, any sector, any size, anywhere. The challenges will obviously be very, very different. But absolutely, we've thought long and hard about the SME world. We recognize that particularly here, this economy is far more slanted that way. So as we're building the community and the local chapter of Future Fit here, then we'll really be focusing in on that side of things and trying to make sure that the tools are as friendly as they possibly can to that end of the market. But yeah, great question, thank you.
Kia ora, I'm Carolyn Savage. My question to you is, how is this actually going back to the United Nations? So when I looked at the reports, I do a lot of reporting and a lot of presentations around the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm invited to be a speaker at a couple of events recently at the United Nations. But one of the things is New Zealand have actually slipped. There's some fantastic work being done where companies are achieving the SDGs, but it's not getting reported, and New Zealand looks in a really bad position if you look at the SDGs in the latest report. We've got a lot of red, orange, and maybe one green was around gender equality. So that's not a good look for New Zealand. So I'd like to know, has your report, the work that you've done, actually been reported up to our government? Because they actually are a signatory, so they should be taking it to the United Nations. How has this been done Or do you need someone to come and help you do this?
So I think as a publicly owned organisation, we have not been required to report the contribution we're making to the SDGs. I think from a public sector perspective, my sense is there's been a very, very light touch engagement, which isn't to say I don't think it's important or relevant, it's just that's been my experience. So, yeah, we certainly haven't been required to report that up, and I'm not aware of within the CRI, or to be honest, the broader ecosystem that I'm operating in, the SDGs are not something that we're being required to report against. As I say, I'm not saying I think that's a good thing, it's just the way it is right
If
now.
I can just add as well, it's a great question, because even doing this at a city level is hard, let alone at a national level. So I think it's a really, really good question and probably a big gap. So it would be my feel. So let's have a chat. Maybe we just start doing it at a city level, and then we'll kind of get the momentum going.
And just to reflect as an outsider, the first week when we were in Australia, the SDGs were a regular part of the dialogue. And the lady over on the west coast in Perth, who is starting to build the Future Fit chapter in Australia for us, she's all about the SDGs. Literally the entire 2 days we were with her, and the conference and the event we did, it was all built around the SDGs and how Future Fit helps you with the SDGs. I have to say, honestly, in the last 2 weeks when I've been here, the SDGs have really not come up in dialogue. Occasionally, a little bit. So like Roger, I'm making zero judgment call on that at all, merely just reflecting back to you what's been said to me and reflected to me. So I think to that point, I don't get the impression that it's a big focus for businesses and organizations here, which is absolutely going to be a huge challenge then in how you report it. So again, just take that as an anecdote from a visitor.
Probably got time for maybe a couple more questions. I think there's one over here. Yep.
Hi, my name is G, and I'm a coach in sustainability. And my core question is, how do you get more adoption across organizations? In an organization for more sustainable practice. I have to give some context here because I'm afraid that I might go off because I actually don't. I wanted to hear a different answer, I think, to what Tony asked for SMEs, because it didn't feel or didn't sound actionable enough. Because in your organization, C-suite or board have already agreed that they're going to do this. At 90% of other organizations, they're not in. Boards don't care. I met a chair of a port recently, and he comes up to me and he says, sustainability is bullshit. And that was within 2 minutes of meeting. And this is how most of this dialogue is happening here in Canterbury and in New Zealand and all over the world. I travel and I work in this space. So what is your answer to that in terms of more adoption in organizations when you get faced with that, if leadership hasn't bought in yet? Yeah,
so I think two things on that. Firstly, look, if leadership is a bottleneck and doesn't want this to happen, it's not going to happen. Right? Let's just be honest. If the top don't want this to happen, fine, you can put recycling bins in the, in the staff room or whatever, and yeah, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference. This has to be led from the top. So I'm happy to go sort of toe-to-toe with the senior leadership team and have that conversation, but I know there's a lot of people who don't want to be convinced, and I'm regularly told that this is a whole load of BS, and all I'm interested in is the bottom line, and the bottom line is if the bottom line doesn't work, then there's no room for sustainability. And I point out, well, that's totally fine, but in 20 to 25 years, the planet and society, well, the planet will be fine, but society upon it will end. That's the reality of what we're facing. So if you want to get down to the black and white of it, that's what we're looking at. If you want to rush headlong into that with your organization, well, I can't stop you. I'm going to go and find the organizations and the people who do want to work. That being said, within organizations, it's about finding the individuals who can understand that this is partly a risk management exercise. If you put your head in the sand and you think this isn't affecting you, well, it's not affecting your supply chains, it's not affecting your factories, it's not affecting your stakeholders, it's not affecting those who want to come and work for you. Again, I'm not arguing with you that people have that viewpoint, but I think increasingly the pressure is upon them, Add to that the regulatory and reporting pressures. I think we just have to keep showing that there is a better and alternative way to be doing things, to be building that community of people who are moving in the right direction. At the end of the day, I'm way more interested in working with people who want to move in this direction, who want to launch the lifeboats off the Titanic, and who want to create a better socio-economic system than banging my head against a brick wall with people who just won't change their view. I can show there's a better way to do things. That's what I'm interested in doing.
Can I just add, I don't know if you were here for the beginning when we talked about the ambition. One of the things that I'm doing with the Christchurch ambition is I am talking at that level. It has to be at that level for exactly what you've just said. We have to get the chief executives and the chairs to buy into this. And what I'm finding is some of my best conversations are when we get into the real details about the money to be saved or made by doing this. So I went to a developer. I mean, if you go to a developer, you're kind of not going to expect they're going to be an easy sign up to this, right? So a housing developer, brilliant conversation. So, because actually they're looking to save waste, because that actually helps improve their margin. So it's just about the angle at which you come to it, and we're finding that our communication and the way we talk about this has to be about those two words together. It's about the economy bit of regenerative economy. If you just talk about becoming regenerative or sustainable on its own, you just can't get the traction a lot of the time with people who, quite frankly, in a recession are struggling to keep the lights on. But yeah, it's got to come from the top. Did you want to add anything, Roger?
No, I wish I'd got a really clever answer to that question. I mean, yeah, it's the big question, but I've got nothing other to add, I'm afraid.
Awesome. One more question maybe, and then I think we'll wrap it up. We've got more? Yeah. Lucky last.
G'day, I'm Jim. I think a lot of people basically tick boxes and they say, oh, yeah, we're doing it. And I think in New Zealand, okay, at a national level, it's going to be very difficult to basically bring in essentially the best practices from around the world to implement and force that to trickle down. So I think it's more up to the cities and the regional partners to do that. Out of the, 16 cities and 55 regional partners, who do you think is doing best? And then who do you think is doing worst? Because I think if you don't name and shame, if you don't put a ranking system on it, basically everyone's just going to try and do their own thing, and it's much better to go, actually, these three are crushing it, and here's why. Let's copy that everywhere else, rather than every single council in New Zealand trying to implement their own thing, wasting money, wasting time, wasting energy. Thoughts?
Well, I'm going to flick that one to Ali. Actually, you go, Ali, and I have got a comment, a less facetious comment.
I think you're exactly right. Look, one of my biggest frustrations is the New Zealand desire to reinvent everything in a bespoke way. We just don't do modular here. It's the kind of the shadow side of the number 8 wire. And I am not afraid to steal with pride, and I, having worked for central government, full believer in New Zealand Inc., and that a rising, I wonder how many more cliches I can get into this, but a rising tide floats all boats. So I'm really pleased to see Heather and Miles here, for example, from North Canterbury, because when we're looking, for example, at the energy strategy that we're building, yes, we need to get it together for Christchurch, which is predominantly an urban centre, but it's only going to work and have traction at a national level if we start to think as Canterbury and then more broadly as the South Island. That's just, it's obvious. So, and I would say we're not leading the way in this, but we bloody will be. Mm-hmm. So, and the only way we're going to be leading, I don't know who I look up to. It's really interesting. I have fights with Marty. I have no evidence to say that we're not leading the way in it, but I certainly hope we're not, because I don't feel like we're as far ahead as we could or should be. So if we're leading the way, then we've got a long way to go as a country. So I think we have great aspirations, I think we have a great framework, and I think we're going to really catch up and overtake really quickly. But it's a really good, I don't know who I look up to, I really don't know. It's a really good question.
And what I wanted to say was, a really good question, and then pretend I'm a politician and talk about something slightly different, but it is actually related. And that's that, as far as I'm concerned, as a kind of conscious consumer, there are two types of businesses. There are those that are rightly getting censured for greenwashing, and those that are rightly getting censured for doing nothing about future prosperity, the well-being of future generations. And there's risk in that for businesses because citizens, not consumers, citizens are starting to wake up to this. So I think if you put that longer lens of prosperity, what you're talking about is exactly the kind of transparency that people, citizens, are going to start demanding of our cities, our businesses. Let's get ahead of this curve. So thanks for the question.
Awesome. Look, I'm going to bring it to a close there. Great questions. So I have thousands of questions myself. You would do well to get out of here before about 7 o'clock at night. But look, I just wanted to say another huge thank you to both Martin and Roger. I thought it was really, really inspirational. I think we've been really lucky to have you here. Look, just before I wrap up, I wanted to share with you another fantastic event coming up. We've got an event called Sustainable Business Works. It's Monday the 6th of May. And if you're interested, you can hear from Brianne West, who many of you will know as the founder of Atik, and Kate Hall, two incredible leaders in the sustainability space in New Zealand. And the evening is all about diving deeper into sustainable businesses and understanding what your business can do better in that space. So quite a practical evening. They'll provide you with a really actionable information to take away and implement, as well as a sustainability strategy toolkit. So if you're interested in heading along, keep an eye out on your inbox. We'll send off the link to everyone that registered for today's event, but it will probably sell out. So if you do want to go, I would encourage you to sign in quickly. Look, I also just wanted to, just before I wrap up, as well as thanking our speakers, I wanted to thank my team. So particularly Diana, Kat and Anton, who've worked really hard to pull this together. I think it's a really fantastic opportunity to get really good conversation going, and that's what this is about. It's about the direction of travel. We're not going to solve this overnight. It is multi-generational, but the only way we are going to solve it is if we start talking about it, measuring it, and having some really difficult conversations. So appreciate you all giving up your time for coming today. Please do hang around. I think there is some nibbles over there that you can grab. Make sure you do have a chat to people that you haven't met before, and thank you very much for your attendance. Keep going.